My name is Dr. Gary Rayant. I have the honor of being the chair of the Advisory Committee on Policy and Advocacy for the Center for Children and Youth of Jewish Family and Children's Services. Are there any Jews in the room? Oh, good. I just want to make sure I was in the right place. Just a few words about the session. I've titled this little piece, my very short introduction, There Are Lies, Damn Lies, and Social Media. I don't know if, for those of you who know, the Parsha just a couple of weeks ago was Metzorah, that dealt with ritual impurity. And what it talks about there is, it says one line, beware the evil tongue. So look what's happened to Jews worldwide. Anti-Semitism abounds, spread by lies and deceit, amplified millions of times by social media, and all spread by words. There's not even a direct prohibition against evil speech in the Torah, but there is a prohibition against gossip, lashon hara. What makes Judaism different is that it's supremely a religion of holy words. With words, God created the universe, and God said, "Let there be," and there was. Through words, God communicated with humankind. In Judaism, language itself is holy. That is why lashon hara, the use of language to harm, is not merely a minor offense, it is unholy. God created the natural universe with words. We sometimes destroy the social universe with words. Speech is what holds society together. What sustains cooperation is trust. This is precisely why lashon hara is so destructive. It undermines trust. It makes people suspicious about one another. It weakens the bonds that hold the group together. If unchecked, lashon hara will destroy any group it attacks: a family, a team, a community, a nation, even a people. Hence its uniquely malicious character. It uses the power of language to weaken the very thing language was brought into creation to create, namely the trust that holds the social bond. It follows that to misuse or abuse language to sow suspicion and dissension, words, occupation, apartheid, genocide, these words are not just destructive, they're sacrilegious. It takes something holy, the ability to communicate, and thus join soul to soul and use it for its lowest purposes, to divide soul from soul and destroy the trust on which relationships depend. So we are here. This is our chance, if not our job, to put guardrails around social media and to do our part today in Tikkun Olam. So thank you all for being here. This is a great opportunity and chance to lobby together for the greater good. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Danny Weiss from Common Sense Media as Chief Advisory Officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for those wonderful words. My name is Danny Weiss. I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer at Common Sense Media. I'm very pleased to be with all of you today. I want to thank Jeff Weiner from the Children and Family Services of the Bay Area, who's been a close colleague of Common Sense, working on policy in Sacramento and to help kids and families. So I'll be real quick, and then we'll jump right into some questions, and then hope to get some questions from you all. In case you don't know Common Sense Media, we are the nation's largest organization dedicated to helping kids and families have a healthier and positive experience in their digital lives. Some of you may know us from our ratings and reviews, or you may know us because we're in most of the California schools with a digital literacy program, and we do policy advocacy on behalf of Senator Stern's cyberbullying bill, on behalf of Assemblymember Josh Lowenthal's bill, AB 3172, to try to hold social media companies accountable, and other bills around the country. Has anyone ever played the game Two Truths and a Lie? So, two truths and a lie. The first is technology is helpful, it's fun, it's boosted our economy, it's educational, advanced science and health. Kids, teens, and adults, most of the time, like it. Another thing, social media platforms are causing serious harms to kids and to our civil society and to our democracy. There's almost no regulation placed on social media. We get addicted quite easily to our phones. We get addicted to social media sites. We spend too much time on it, and it can even be deadly. And then lastly, there's nothing we can do about it. You think that was a lie? All right, I'm with you. Table number 3 wins. We're here to talk about what are some of the challenges and problems with social media, but we do believe, at Common Sense anyway, and I think there's plenty of evidence to this, and some of our panelists might agree, that there's pros and cons to social media. So we're not here to say, let's eliminate it, at least I'm not. Teens get a lot of value out of being on social media. They find community on social media. They do a lot of interesting exploring on social media. And at the same time, they're too young, as our doctor here will tell us, they're too young to know when to stop, and they're too young to know if they're going down a very dangerous path. And the companies want them to go down those paths because time is money on social media. The more time you spend on social media, the more advertising revenue they generate, the more profitable that they become. Okay, with that, maybe we'll just jump right into the question portion because I'm told that we have a little less time than normally. I think you just flip that up right there. All right. And then we can hand another one over there. Senator Stern, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you are sponsor of a number of bills, but one of them has to do with cyberbullying in particular. Can you tell us about your bill and why that's so important to you?
I'm trying to remember in Mitsora what the antidote to Lashon Hara is. I know that you have to sit outside the camp for a while and you get sarat, and there's a bunch of other implications. I guess in a non-biblical context, what we're trying to do is actually put a stopgap in place that will prevent the platforms from acting with impunity and make those reports of bullying that you all see, you can flag a post, but that those flags and those tags and those reports don't just go off into the ether. Right now, there's no obligation on part of the platforms, at least in law, to respond. They say they'll take them into account, but we know it's not happening. So now, within 36 hours of that report, they're gonna have to confirm receipt, investigate legitimized complaints, put resources into this, and take responsibility for maybe not the content of the speech, but the injuries caused by that speech. And I think that's really we're getting back from the companies. Maybe I'm the guy sponsoring because I went to Harvard and was down the hall from Zuckerberg when he started Facebook, and I liked the book version better. I was like, oh, let's circle the pictures. And they're like, oh, you want to work here? I'm like, I don't know if that has legs. So don't count on me for stock picks or
financial advice.
Financial advice. Yeah. I don't think I'm your guy. But trying to put some responsibility back on these companies to deal with these incidents, specifically acts of anti-Semitism, but across the board. Trans kids who are being targeted, acts of racism, and these have real implications. We're going to hear from panelists who have felt it all too real. But we hope 1504 sort of starts to turn the tide a little bit. It's a modest effort. We have all these constraints on us with Section 230 and the First Amendment. But I always say that the First Amendment didn't anticipate social media, just like the Second Amendment didn't anticipate AR-15s. That we don't know. Our founding fathers could have never thought, oh, you're just stamping out pamphlets and you're publishing the old version of Common Sense. You had to hand it out. Yeah. Now you've got a weapon of potentially mass destruction that is able to push this stuff out there, and that amplification we see in real time, causing teen suicide and all the rest. So it's not just that bill. We're also trying to create safe environments at schools and give school boards the opportunities to actually not have social media free campuses. So that's another bill we're working on, where school boards will now have the option, at least explicitly in law, to say this isn't an environment where we're going to have Snapchat available to students at class breaks to target each other. And once we get young people in environments where they're not going to have FOMO, where they're not going to be the only kid who's not on the platform, it's going to be a lot easier. We've seen this experiment happening in districts where if we can set rules of the road, they start to pick their heads up out of their phones and interact with each other. So we feel like if we can go school by school and board by board and start to sort of chip away at this through state law, we start to turn the tide and show young people a different way of being with each other, where you're not chasing it.
Great.
So thanks for all your
Thank
advocacy,
you.
though.
And then when you all go and visit the legislators later today, of course, 1504 and other bills will be high on the list. If you don't mind, Michelle, I'll turn to you. One of the, I know you've had some issues in your own family and with your children, and you're going to tell us about that. Personal stories are so important in advocacy as you're going around talking to people, so you could think about your own families. But right now in the United States, there's a very big debate about who's actually responsible for controlling the effects of social media on kids. If you were to ask Meta, they would say parents should bear the full brunt of the responsibility. And if you ask the state of Florida, which just passed a ban on social media for kids under 13 and a requirement for parental consent for kids under 16, they would say that parents bear the biggest brunt. Our view is that the companies are the ones that are responsible. And we have a lot of very competent legislation to hold companies responsible, requiring them to design and operate their platforms in a way that minimizes the harms, but continues to allow kids and teens to do what they want to do online. So Michelle, with that as a backdrop, can you tell us your own story and then where you are on that issue about who's really responsible?
Sure. So my story starts at the beginning of the school year, and my son is 17 years old. He's the kind of kid that people would say is friendly. Teachers would assign him to welcome new kids into the school, kind of gave everybody a chance until they didn't deserve it, as opposed to being really reserved. So really open, kind, and friendly. What we learned is that social media is, as has been mentioned here, is really been used as a weapon. When we were young, most of us in this room were young, people would bully to your face and it would go around to 5 or 6 people and you could go home and it would be over. Now what happens is things go out on social media, kids don't talk to each other, and instead it spreads throughout a school like wildfire. So what Luke experienced was people started ignoring him. Friends, casual classmates would start walking away from him or would move away their seats. They'd actually not sit next to him and get up and move when he came into a room. My son does not have social media. However, we felt the full effects of what it actually does to kids. He didn't know why this was happening. People would move away from him at lunch. They would stop talking to him in his peer groups. And until friends came up to him and said, "What's going on? We're seeing all these rumors. We're hearing all these things about you. We don't think it's true, but we don't know what to believe." Anyone who knew him, just his close few friends, actually stuck with him, but everyone else really shunned him and made him feel isolated and alone. And it came to the point where he was actually being threatened by people he didn't even know at school because they believed the lies that they were seeing. And they were threatening him at school, so he was afraid to go to school. What that looks like at home is a kid that comes home that's quiet, that's despondent, that's just in such a shell and a hole that you don't even really know how to reach him. Mm-hmm. We were very afraid for his safety, even at home, for a long time. One of the things that I think is really important as parents is to be able to open a line of communication with your teens, and that's really hard. But that is what I did with my son. I told him I wouldn't drive him anywhere unless he talked to me and told me what was happening in his life. And if he wanted to go anywhere, it was up to him to share. And I think that's really what saved him. At the end of this ordeal, we spoke to the school a number of times. They really couldn't do anything about rumors that are spreading throughout the campus, that are spreading throughout social media. You can't find them, you can't see them, but they're out there. And I actually pulled him out of school and had him come with me to work the last 3 weeks of school because I was afraid for him at home. Really worried that he was going to commit suicide. He was in a place that was so dark and so empty, not having anyone who believed in him and anyone who accepted him. And I was afraid for him at school, getting threats of violence because of the lies that were being spread. So I drove him around. He came with me to work every single day for the last 3 weeks of school, and I brought him back to school for just for his finals, and then we pulled him out to a new school. What that looks like now is a new kid, but every day that someone looks at him funny or that maybe moves away from him for some reason that isn't any way related, he goes right back into this fear of, oh my God, this is happening again. People are gonna leave me and isolate me and make me feel shunned again. So it's an ongoing battle that we face, that he faces. And social media is something that we just feel, like you mentioned, spreads hate and division and lies and really bad lies that hurts a lot of kids and turns them to a place where they can't come out of.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for talking about that. That's a good segue for our next panelist, for Dr. Kraft, who's a professor of pediatrics at the Keck School of Medicine at USC and is the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has been a real champion on issues of children's well-being, of course, but in particular around technology. So I'll tee you off by just asking you this question. If you don't think about Michelle's son for a second, who doesn't use social media, but the other children who are doing that, what is it about kids and their brains and social media and technology that leads kids to make these wrong choices?
That's a great question. And when you look at kids, their frontal lobe, the part of their brain that is the stop and think and executive function, and maybe we shouldn't be doing that, is under construction. And we know that that part of the brain is still developing until kids are about 25 years old. And we know some people where that part of the brain never really develops. But for kids, it's important because the same content for an adult is going to be something an adult will say, yeah, that's not good. But a child might actually be interested in it. And there are neurologic pathways that take disturbing images, and when somebody likes it, when there's an emoji there, when somebody scrolls on it for too long, it actually is something that kids begin to be interested in. And so social media companies know about this. So when I talk with my pediatric colleagues, I ask them, who's the market? Who are the consumers for social media? Who are the customers? It's the advertisers. Kids are a commodity. And so what these platforms do is they look to see, have you scrolled on this ad for 2 seconds versus 3 seconds? Have you liked this particular content? And they individualize these algorithms so that my social media is different than anybody else's in the room, is different from any of our teenagers. And what happens is that kids will scroll on these social media sites. Now we know 30 minutes actually is good for kids. They can connect with other kids. They can actually socialize with other kids. It helps kids be creative. It helps kids who are somewhat marginalized find people who are like them. Yeah. But more than 2 hours, the data is very clear. It leads to twice as much anxiety and depression, twice as much suicidal content, I think 6 times more eating disorders or other bad sorts of things that are out there. And that we actually have solutions to regulate these platforms. If you look at the European Union and you look at the UK, they have put in something called the Appropriate Age Design Code. And so in the UK, Instagram will notify a child under 18 years of age if somebody has approached them who's been flagged for suspicious behavior. TikTok will not let you follow somebody who is under 18. Google will allow you to take away any images of yourself if you're under 18. This is already happening, and when California wanted to implement the same safety for our kids 2 years ago, NetChoice, who represents Meta and Snapchat and all these platforms, sued and said, well, this is a free speech problem. Well, I think we have to put our kids first. And the legislation that's coming out now, Senator Stern and his colleagues, and Senator Stern has been such an advocate for all of us, has basically pushed back and said there are pieces of this design content that we know is working because the laws support them in the European Union and the UK, and we need this in the United States to protect our kids.
Excellent. Thank you. Also providing a good segue for our next panelist, Dr. Drew Cingel, who's an associate professor at the Department of Communications at UC Davis and works specifically on technology and social media. So if you don't mind just taking us to a slightly deeper level, because this is really important, about your last point, Dr. Kraft, about how the companies say you're not allowed to do this because of the First Amendment. We do have a First Amendment in the United States that we all cherish. But the company's view of the First Amendment is that it's enormously expansive, and recently they got a federal judge to agree with them so that anything they put on their site is covered by the First Amendment. That's unacceptable. That's not even a legally sound argument. It was a very poor decision, and hopefully it will get overturned. But the algorithm, the basis by which companies drive one person to one place and one person to another place, companies believe that's protected by the First Amendment. But Drew, would you mind just talking to us for a little bit about how we should understand the platform's algorithms and how they understand kids and make those two things work for the company's benefit as opposed to for the kids' benefit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I want to underscore what a lot of other people have already said on this panel and just be very clear. It does not need to be this way. There are easy things that we can do to protect children and adolescents online, and I thank the senator and I thank the other politicians that are working to do that in the state of California. In our recent study, what we did is we created fake accounts on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We set the ages to 18, which legally able to do, and then we started to manipulate how we interacted with those platforms. And in one case, we acted like 7-year-olds. We spent 20 minutes acting like a 7-year-old, and within a week, it learned that we were a 7-year-old, and we're pushing easily child-directed content at those accounts. Now, that's what algorithms are designed to do, right? But 7-year-olds legally cannot be on these platforms. And to me, that suggests that these companies have a reasonable knowledge that there are people on these platforms under the age of 13. And many of the studies show that about 40% of children between the ages of 8 and 12 use social media, even though, again, legally they're not able to do so. But the more concerning thing, for us at least, is we also started to interact with these accounts as a 16-year-old struggling with mental health. We just post things that say, I'm depressed, I have no friends, my parents don't understand me. Within a week again, it learned that we were struggling with our mental health, but it pushed dark, disturbing, triggering content our way. With few exceptions, there were some exceptions that said, hey, do you need help? Here are resources. The vast majority of the data, of the recommendations that we got were people crying at night, sad scenes, more depressing content, to the point that I had undergraduate researchers in the lab that I needed to tell them to take breaks and slow down because I was worried about their own mental health looking at this content. So again, it does not need to be this way. Those algorithms are proprietary, they're owned by the social media systems, that is not third-party content, And it seems from our research at least that there is a reasonable conclusion that these companies could know the age of their users as well as the mental health status of their users.
Thank you, Drew. Senator Stern, let me come back to you real quick, and then in a few minutes we'll open it up to the audience. But this is an important health issue. It's an important social issue, but it's also a very political issue.
Yes.
And you are in the midst of it, and like your colleagues in other states and in the United States Congress, the tech industry is quite vocal and obviously, well adjusted at lobbying, shall we say, to put it mildly. Yeah. What's it like to be a senator who wants to take on the industry in one form or another? And just in a minute or two, how do you navigate that, and any suggestions for the audience here when they go visit their legislators?
I mean, I was one of the tech association's tech legislator of the year when I first came in, because sitting on judiciary and some of these committees that I sit on, I have a fluency in it. Maybe it's just being the first millennial elected to the Senate, or that sort of demonstrating an understanding of how these things work. They said, okay, that's an ally, and sort of start to groom him and get him ready. So I actually have, and I mean, I mentioned my classmate from college, but I know these people personally. I went to school with them, come up with them. I ended up being part of a startup company after college that eventually became Causes on Facebook. It was called eAssembly. It was supposed to be a place for democratic conversation, and it eventually evolved. So it's alluring. And there's a value, as you mentioned at the outset in your truths, that these technology can provide great good. I work a lot on climate change, for instance. AI can solve issues like keeping our power online. So there's all these reasons to kind of want to go with the flow. But there's raw power and money now, and they've woken up and realized they got to play the game just like big oil does. Yeah. Just like tobacco did. And that effort is intense, but I would say I'm not doom and gloom about it. I mean, I think next week they're going into markup at Energy and Commerce, House Energy and Commerce Committee, right, chaired by a Republican, Morris Rogers. But Wasserman Schultz, who's on that committee, has a bipartisan bill to actually give parents the power to get flagged when their children are viewing harmful content, and force the platforms to actually disclose that. We've modeled a bill off that called Sammy's Law.
Sammy's Law, yeah.
So we've got a parallel bill here, and I've got Republicans on board with me. A lot of them tend to be parents, yeah, right? Because you kind of put down your political hat when you're worried about the health and safety of your kids. So I think there's actually signs for hope to transcend the tech lobby, but they are the golden goose of California. They are the tax revenue source. The more IPOs we get, the less of a budget deficit we have. The more tech executives make in California, right, the better our economy is going to do overall. So there's a hesitation to poke at that and mess with them that we've seen over the years. And look, we just got to kind of soldier through this moment, I think, and find those bipartisan opportunities to get through it. You saw the TikTok ban move through Congress. See how that plays out. But I actually think parents aligning and young people too, we can beat them. It's just going to take power.
This room can beat them.
You sure can.
Yeah. Well, thank you for
sure
that.
Can.
I wanted to introduce a colleague of mine, Mikey Hoti, if you wouldn't mind standing up, with Common Sense Media. He represents our policy work here in Sacramento. Thank you, Mikey, for being here. And, I think he's put a piece of paper on the table. So we'll take a few questions, and then if you're not asking the questions that I'm thinking about, I might ask one more of our panel, but ask them of any of our panelists. So I see the first two hands here, sir and lady.
My question is, I'm sort of old school. I was a print journalist for years before I went to teaching. And in print journalism, you have this quaint thing called libel, and you have this quaint thing called slander, which Congress apparently decided they would give social media companies carte blanche by now calling them publishers when they look like publishers, they act like publishers, they quack like publishers, but they're not held accountable legally. Is there any thought to trying to
mean, you're getting at Section 230 and sort of their immunity under federal law. It's very hard for us as a state to end around that. I think our best tool right now is how to put sort of precise penalties and disincentives in place. So Senator Glazer, who's speaking on another panel here, has legislation, for instance, in the journalism sphere. And I got my paper copy, by the way, of the newspaper here. I had to, so I still hang on to the I guess the past. But to put a fee, just like Europe has, on the platforms to actually fund small, local, independent journalism and to sort of keep that going. If we were able to price those externalities, in other words, and not just the news desert externalities, but the suicide externalities, right? The bulimia and anorexia externalities, all these other effects that aren't being sort of internalized, if we can start to force those costs to be internalized, we can start to change their business model. I don't know how to change Section 230 yet.
You can't do that at the state level.
And they'll knock us back, and the Supreme Court hasn't been great on it, and corporations are wisening up to that and saying, hey, under Citizens United, we're like people, right? We have free speech rights like everyone else. I don't see corporations that way, but the Supreme Court has. So we've got to get creative, and that's really been our best tool right now, is force those externalities to be internalized and start to put a price on it and start to hammer at their business model, even if we can't affect the underlying law.
Next question.
Hey, sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat. So, speaking as a trans person, who has friends who were saved by social media when they were younger, because they were, had abusive parents, were living in abusive homes. The idea of laws which would prevent them from having access to social media when kids might be in abusive homes is really scary to me. And, you know, social media does a lot of harm. We all know that. And it scares me the idea that people might not be able to access resources and communities online. So I actually have so that's one thing. And then the other thing I wanted to ask, or hear your thoughts on, is that in the past decade or so, we've seen the death of the separation of social media sites in terms of ages. So we've seen the disappearance of places like Club Penguin that are specifically geared toward kids. And so because of that, we no longer have a place where kind of adults can be adults and kids can be kids in the digital sphere. And so kind of throwing all of that at you, what are your thoughts on those?
I don't know if Dr. Kraft or Michelle or Drew, one of you want to take that?
Yeah, I can speak to that for a second. I want to be very clear. Social media is an incredibly powerful tool. It can be used like any tool for good or bad. We know that people, particularly in the LGBTQ community, can use social media to find, when they feel alone, to find community. And that's an incredibly powerful and positive way that social media can be leveraged. Where we are right now is there are 25 states across the country, all of which that have different types of regulations working their way through. And I don't think that we have research evidence to understand which of those variations are best overall. It's more of a let's see what we can do at this moment. I don't know the answer to that beyond that, other than to continue to do more research. I'm working on the Utah bill, one part of which that has passed gives parents access to their children's content when they request it. I find that very concerning for the reasons that you spoke of. And that's why we're studying it, to understand how can we come up with regulations that help promote health and well-being for all children and adolescents.
Dr. Kraft, do you want to speak to the first part of what?
Absolutely. So there are places where they are looking at restrictions of age for social media. And I think that California is very smart in that we are not going in that way, precisely because of the things that you had mentioned. And honestly, I have 1-year-olds in my practice who can manage YouTube better than I can. So kids can get around any age restriction. It really is putting the onus on the platforms. This is what we know you collect in terms of our data. This is what we know you send us in content or send our kids in content. We need to regulate that piece of it to keep everybody safe.
Can I add
Thank you.
one quick
Yeah,
thing?
and then we have 2 more questions back.
They can be precise, right?
4.
We can micromanage how they do this work. So in Sammy's law, for instance, that we're carrying in the federal counterpart, we negotiated with the Trevor Project and with Equality California to actually make sure that those flags that go to a parent or a teacher or whomever has a consensual relationship with that student that says the student has to give them, or the kid has to give them access to their account first, right? So the kid has the power to say, here's my password. So they still control that decision. And then the flags don't go up for content, for instance, that is helping young people find their identity. So, but it does flag it on hate speech, on bullying, on acts of violence. So we can kind of tailor, and that's why we're not trying to do a blanket ban, for instance, across the board. We're trying to say social media free school zones, right? But not to take that tool away, because we know it can be a source of freedom and a saving grace for young people who feel isolated.
So thank you for those answers. I see there were 4 people who wanted to ask a question. More than 4. We only have 10 minutes. Maybe what we'll do is, if you don't mind just asking your question, and there might be some similarities, I'll take some notes, and then the panelists can respond to them as a group. Is that all right? We'll start with 4. So the gentleman here. No, I'm sorry. I think you had your hand up first. Just speak up if so.
Yeah. We see how much social media has changed over every decade. AOL, Weiss, it's all changing. And then AI seems to be changing every hour and every day, which is accelerating, even more concerning. So I know some of us have younger kids. Is there any idea of where AI is going to take this conversation? I don't feel like there could be an entire panel on it.
Yeah. No, you could. Okay, we'll come to that, and then, sir, you had a question?
I'm a long-time user of what I consider high-quality news media. I'm a bit of a junkie. I have recently learned, because I'm not familiar with social media, but I've recently learned from younger folks that I've been talking to how they get their news, and it's from what they call a news feed, which strikes me as something that feeds them the news that companies want them to learn. I'm wondering if you have any concerns about a generation being fed news as opposed to having some reasonably curated news like you might get from a newspaper.
Okay. And then there were 2 other, this gentleman, and then there. Yes.
Okay, thank you. By the way, it's a very interesting subject. It's kind of 2 questions that blend into one. The first question is about consequences.
About what?
You talked about consequences.
Consequences?
You talked about, who is responsible. I think it's a joint responsibility between parents and the companies. But I want to hear if there are any consequences, because if kids are putting content there, and if we want to connect it to the JPAC, and there was a ton of anti-Semitism and bullying around, pagan Zionists, what are the consequences that we can have in parents and schools to help fight this? And then, as coming from this, is there any plan of education within schools that is targeted towards teenagers, whether it's middle school and high school, where you teach the kids about how you look at data, and how do you understand that this is correct or not correct, and how do you have your readers on of is it false or not, and then how do you use it for your benefit, but also how do you have your red flags to say, no, this is not for us, somebody wants to mess up with it.
Okay, I didn't plant that question, but that is what Common Sense Media does. So with our digital citizenship curriculum, it's in, I believe, 15,000 schools in California alone, 87,000 schools nationwide. So let's just take those 3 topics. The first one was about social media changing so fast. AI is changing even faster. Is there any interest in looking into that? We certainly are interested in looking at AI. News media junkies, is there a concern that researchers or others have about kids having their news feed curated for them online? And the third one is the consequences for kids who are using social media in harmful ways. So I don't know, Michelle, you haven't said anything recently. Do you want to speak to that last part?
I think As far as kids using social media and having even the news feed, I feel like that's incredibly dangerous. As I've seen, even lies and untruths about people spread so quickly through the school that once you start getting things fed to you that you start to believe that have no relevance of truth, I think that's also very dangerous and a path that we're already going down as adults. As far as what you were speaking about in the curriculum in schools, I think my husband is a teacher, and I feel like that's really what we try to do at home, is to talk to the kids about what they're reading and look at the sources and is it a reliable source, and if that could be a statewide or a nationwide curriculum at this point where you're arming kids with knowledge and with skepticism of what's real and what's not real, I think that would be a just incredibly valuable tool and something we really need to do moving forward to keep our kids healthy and to keep them safer.
Great, thank you. Dr. Kraft or Drew, the question about kids receiving their news through a feed that is probably being influenced by an algorithm. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the concern there, right, like I was saying before, the algorithm very quickly learns your personal preferences and is going to send you content that fits with your personal preferences. So it's essentially going to tell you what you want to hear or what it thinks that you want to hear. And the concern with that, as you said, is that you're not as media literate. You're not as able, or especially a young person who's less developed, less experienced, doesn't have the ability to read multiple news sources, triangulate between them, and come to their own conclusion about what the truth is or what the answer is. So yeah, I'm absolutely concerned about that, and I think that's why these algorithms are a part of so many of these regulatory bills.
Dr. Kraft, anything you want to add?
And I would just caution you that, remember too, the algorithms are driven by the data that they collect. And so when we have our bills that restrict the data that they can get from our kids, they help to improve their privacy and security. That's going to change the nature of some of these algorithms, and that will really help to keep our kids safer.
And then lastly, the question about AI and what kind of response California might have to that.
Yeah, we've got a couple of huge bills we're tackling. Senator Wiener, who's the co-chair of the Jewish caucus, who faces probably more hate online than any person I know. And all of you should be looking out for him because he puts himself all the way out there. But he's carrying SB 1047 that would force any new iteration of AI by these sort of large-scale platforms to kind of go do a road test and disclose to California in a report before launching that new update to their algorithm the potential harms from it, and specifically citing harms to children. And so sort of putting a pause on new updates. I mean, they're not going to love this, although I will say OpenAI has been more interested in that than some of the competitors. So the Microsoft sort of world is maybe the whiter hat amongst the very profit-driven world, but that would be the idea. And in terms of consequences for that, I mean, look, Facebook just launched without any requirement for government regulation with Ray-Ban. Now your glasses can do AI, and you can spot a landmark or look at a product, but you're also going to be able to look at people and figure out who they are just through your glasses. It gets very scary very quickly. So I think we're going to push something big through the legislature this year and try to get on top of it. The consequence side, though, some of our legislation, the cyberbullying one, for instance, would give you a private right of action to sue that social media company if they did not respond to an incident of cyberbullying. So as a parent or as a teacher, right, who sees something happening in their class, who has no tools, and like your son's teacher didn't know what to do, you report it to them, they can't see it, it's on the phone, we'd finally give them tools and give you guys pressure opportunities through your local school boards to say, what are you doing about this? And hey, now the state of California says you can go to court if you need to. So
Great, thank you. We're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you to our panel. I wanted to remind people again that your voices really matter. So I worked in government for a long time. I know what it's like when an office is visited by people who have personal stories and who are well informed. And we got a lot of great information today. So I hope you can carry that with you and feel committed that you can be a voice for change. There's other issues that you're talking about, but in terms of this particular topic, very important. You can also help us be a stronger voice for change if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, become part of our advocacy constituency. We mobilize people throughout California when it's time to, like if there's a vote count and Senator Stern needs more help. Common Sense Media does that kind of work, so you can send an email to advocacy@commonsense.org and we can sign you up. And thank you again for your attention. Thank you again to our panelists.
Lush and Tov. You're going to do Lush and Tov today, not Lush and Har. Lush and Tov.